Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Stone Chapel Podcast. My name is David Capes. The Dead Sea Scrolls were the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century, perhaps of all time. We found the remains of a Jewish library from the centuries prior to and at the time of Jesus of Nazareth, Paul, and the rest of the apostles. Today, we explore the idea of resurrection in the scrolls with scroll scholar Dr. Andrew Perrin. The Stone Chapel Podcast is brought to you by the good people at the Lanier Theological Library Learning Center. We are part of the Church Leaders Podcast Network. The idea of the resurrection of physical bodies was a basic part of the New Testament teaching, not only with regard to Jesus of Nazareth, but also about the destiny of those who are found in Christ. But we find little evidence of the resurrection in the Old Testament. Now, some scholars say there's not really any. So what happened between the end of the Old Testament and the start of the New? The Dead Sea Scrolls tell part of that story. So today, Canadian scroll scholar Dr. Andrew Perrin here on the Stone Chapel Podcast.
My name's Andrew Perrin, and I'm a professor of humanities at Athabasca University in Alberta, Canada.
Dr. Andrew Perrin. Andy, good to see you. Welcome to the Stone Chapel Podcast.
It is fantastic to be not just on the podcast, but actually just a few feet away from the actual Stone Chapel. I'm glad to finally be here with you on campus.
You're actually going to be in that spot tomorrow, and you're all over the campus. And you flew down yesterday from Calgary, and we're just so glad to see you.
It's fantastic to be here. Thanks for having me. Really looking forward to everything you're doing and to this chat.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
You've got a new book out we're going to talk about in just a minute, but for those who don't know Andrew Perrin, who is he?
Yes, that's a question I wake up asking myself every single day. My name's Andy Perrin. I'm a scrolls scholar, kind of by trade, and that's been the better part of more than half my life. So these mysterious Dead Sea Scrolls have captured and kept my interest. I teach at Athabasca University presently, but my past positions are at Trinity Western, which might be more familiar to some folks. Student there, faculty member there. I directed the Dead Sea Scrolls Institute. That's been a real major part of my journey, and not just academically, but personally. You know, these ancient texts, where do they come from? What do they mean? And what do we do with them today? More importantly than being a scroll scholar, I'm a husband, I'm a dad. I've got two young kids at home, and that's where I try to keep my best self for is being a good scholar, being a good dad. And
you're a coach, is that true?
I am a coach-ish. We've got young kids that are a little bit into sports, and the best way to support them and get into it is just to find a spot on the bench alongside them and that are busy doing that. And you and I were just chatting earlier about all things, microphones and music and guitars. I see you've got a guitar in the corner over here, and that's another part of my life too. We can be critical thinkers, but I think we need a creative mind, so I play music a bit as well.
Well, that's an important part of my soul.
Yeah, you've got to have it.
Well, it's a delight to have you here. Let's do a little discussion about your book, first of all. You got a new book about the Dead Sea Scrolls that have come out. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd love to share about that. So my new book is just out with Lexham Press. Folks might know them from kind of associated with Logos Bible software. So if you're into that world, the book is called Lost Words and Forgotten Worlds, Rediscovering the Dead Sea Scrolls. I started writing this book without knowing it through teaching and working with students, mostly at Trinity Western, and inviting them into this space of the scrolls. And through the course of those courses and lectures and just chatting with friends and family, I had a number of people that went, what are these things? But explain it to me like you're not a scholar, make it accessible. So this book is an invitation to the scrolls where I've tried to dismantle any barriers to the scrolls. Even making sense of what their titles are is hard enough, let alone giving somebody a whole book about them.
Because you have hundreds of books that are part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's a library, really.
Yeah, we have something like 930 fragmentary texts.
Okay.
Can imagine if you went down to a thrift store and bought all of their used puzzles, mixed them all together, threw out half the pieces, and said, what do we have here? That's basically what the Dead Sea Scrolls are. Oh, and by the way, they're in Aramaic, Hebrew, and Greek, and they're from thousands of years ago. So if you love puzzles, it's great. If you hate puzzles, do not study the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Well, one person, I'm trying to remember who it was, called it the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century. Was that Walbright?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah,
William
I believe
Albright.
so. Yeah, and I think his comment there is well quoted for a good reason, because the scrolls are these manuscripts that are from a few thousand years ago, before and after kind of year zero, leading up to the Common Era and just after. They're ancient Jewish texts. They have copies of our earliest manuscripts that relate to books of the Old Testament. They have interpretive materials. They have fragments that are related to some Septuagint books and a bunch of writings we didn't even know about. This was like an accidental time capsule, really is what it was.
Oh, I like that characterization.
Yeah.
That's good.
And it gives us a very rare opportunity to go, what have we missed or misunderstood even about biblical history and the shaping of Scripture, the context of Scripture. So my book is really inviting people into those spaces. There's chapters on the development of the books of the Old Testament, how did scribes copy texts, how did they interpret texts, archaeology. We haven't talked about that, but archaeology is a big part of the scrolls because there's an ancient site of Qumran, this scribal community that lived there, preserved and penned many of these scrolls. We can study how they worked. What did they think? What was their life like? There's all sorts of topics in the scrolls, as well as New Testament context. There's not New Testament text there because these are Jewish writings, but this is the common water that the early Jesus movement is swimming in ancient Judaism. So how can we try and get into that space and maybe hear writers like Paul or Jesus, differently in light of that? So the book is meant to invite people into that. It's rooted in rigorous scholarly research, but I'm a fairly normal guy. I try to make things relatable and engaging. So I hope folks will find this is not just an important book for their kind of intellectual pursuits, but also their kind of interest in the scrolls as maybe someone who's coming at it with not a lot of experience or exposure to them.
Well, this book is coming out in the fall of 2025. Once I get my hands on it and get a chance to read it, I want to talk to you about it again.
Yeah, of course.
And discuss different aspects, because I'm sure you come up with some interesting conclusions.
Yeah.
Things I don't know. I mean, I've taught courses on the scrolls. I've studied them myself. I've used them in my own research, and yet there's still just a world of things that I don't know about.
Yeah, me too.
Now, you're here to talk and to do a lecture for us tonight in our Lanier Certificate for Theology and Ministry. So this is the kind of asset that people would get if they were to come and to be a part of that program. We asked you to talk about resurrection in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so what I'd like to do, and we're going to point people later to the full lecture because it'll be available on YouTube. But for now, what I'd like to do is just kind of talk through the kinds of things you're going to be discussing tonight in that lecture.
Yeah, I'd love to give an outline and an invitation, like you said, to point folks kind of forward to engage the whole thing. I want to say thanks for giving me the invite because I have unfinished business with this topic. A lot of unfinished business. Yeah. Maybe a short story, if that's okay. The first, I did an undergraduate in theology, my first degree, and my first time ever giving an academic kind of lecture or paper was after that degree, and it was at a university in southern Alberta, and it was on this topic, resurrection and afterlife. I think it was, between Malachi and Matthew, ancient Judaism. And I started that, and I remember it was a good experience. I remember most, I got a parking ticket on the campus, so it was very, very, so I do have unfinished business. But it was interesting for me now to, a few decades later, go, well, what do I think about this now? And that was already very interesting for myself in that exercise to go, this is something I've been scratching my head on for years. And now with, what I know and keep learning about the scrolls, how do I think differently about it? So tonight we'll look at a few texts. We'll intro the scrolls. What are they? Like we kind of gave an outline here just a minute ago. But then we'll look at two texts in particular. One is called Pseudo-Ezekiel, and the other is called Messianic Apocalypse. The first one, Pseudo-Ezekiel, is a text we didn't know about, but as you can tell from the title, it's related to a text we do know about, the book of Ezekiel. And readers of that book will know Ezekiel 37, this vision of the valley of dry bones, which has inspired and confused generations of interpreters for ages. And this Pseudo-Ezekiel text is part of that tradition going, what is going on here? Is this metaphorical? Is this just hope for the exiles, or is it something more? And the punchline is that this scribe, at least of this tradition, said, no, this is something more. And they interpreted that tradition, that text, to articulate a view that included some sort of future resurrection. So that's a really interesting text that we'll look at. And the other one is another writing among the scrolls. It's a Hebrew text as well called Messianic Apocalypse. That's a modern title. There's about 1 billion modern titles that can be very confusing, but this one, as its name suggests, is trying to give an outline of the signs of the Messianic times. It's an ancient Jewish text that is trying to interpret different writings, like some sections of the Psalms, some sections of Isaiah, and trying to recombine them and then interpret them, and what are the things that will happen when the Messiah shows up. Among those things, there's reference to resurrection of the dead. Now, that in and of itself is really interesting. But the other piece we'll kind of pull apart a bit tonight is, how do we think about that for how we then go reread writings like Matthew or Luke? Because John the Baptist asked Jesus, this is my paraphrase, are you the guy?
Exactly.
Are you the guy? And Jesus' response is a really classic first century rabbi response. It's not a yes or a no. He says, here's some things, if you've been paying attention, that you'll know. And he talks about restoration of health and restoration of sight and releasing prisoners, and the dead will rise. So you have a similar combination of things there, and we'll look at that tonight and ask ourselves what's going on there, and how do we then go look at writings in the New Testament, like I said, Paul or the Gospels, and ask ourselves, have we heard them fully, or can we go back and listen again now with this new information and understand them in a new or different way? So tonight we'll be looking at those two examples, and I picked those because they were ones that challenged my own thinking, that I'm still thinking about. But what I like about Pseudo-Ezekiel is it's kind of looking back on a Hebrew scripture tradition. The scribe, you got to imagine, is going, okay, what was going on there and how do we make sense of it? And the other example is also doing that to a degree, but for Christian readers of the New Testament, it's a good example of how the scrolls can help us kind of then go, well, let's look ahead at the New Testament and go, what else is going on here?
Because they're coming from roughly the same time period, right? I mean, historically, we're looking at maybe plus or minus 100 years between them, or maybe less than that.
Yes. Some of the earliest texts in the scrolls are from about the 3rd century, like stuff like First Enoch or Aramaic Levi document is quite old. And then we also have very, copies of books of, we call now the Old Testament, that are also old, that are among the scrolls. But a lot of the writings that are the ones I'm talking about, like Pseudo-Ezekiel, Messianic Apocalypse, they're coming together in this period, like the 1st century BCE to the 1st century CE or AD. That's in and around the time that you have the early Jesus movement taking shape. And, we have our earliest New Testament books. And, by the time you get into the 1st, 2nd century, that's all happening. So this is that world about what is the shared kind of thought and practice and culture, that we can recover and then see how it changes, or does it change, how we read the New Testament.
Well, there are people that look at the Old Testament and really don't find the idea of resurrection there, the way they read Ezekiel 37 today, let's say. And some do. Some say, this is at least an early hint to the idea that there is life beyond. It's not just we die and that's it. We go down and there's a big question about what happens next. There is this burgeoning hope. And it seems to me the Dead Sea Scrolls, being closer to the New Testament period, are going to reflect that hope in a different way than you might find Ezekiel or Psalms or any of those other texts.
Yeah, I think that one of the things we'll touch on tonight as well is you look at a text like this Ezekiel one, for example. The scrolls, we look at that and we go, that's a new text. And it is a new text. We didn't have it before, so it's new to us. But arguably what's as or even more important is it's a new context to look at these things, which I think was what you're hinting at, is a new context to see what are the cultural conversations of the day on this, and what things do we have the volume turned up on that weren't there as loud before. And you see writings like these, or First Enoch, or even Jubilees, Second Maccabees. Around this period, there's a lot of voices that are saying, we've been experiencing ongoing imperial oppression. A handful of exiles at this point. Some of us have come back. We have Hellenistic culture. Then we have this ancestral tradition about a covenant and promise. Like, what is going on? How does it all fit together? And I think that's where that volume knob starts to get turned up on voices that are saying, well, maybe there's something more than the present reality. And that's where you have, again, Jubilees, Enoch, these scrolls texts, also the New Testament texts. These are speaking to that huge issue of not just past tradition and present reality, but possibly a future hope. And that to me is very interesting.
What is God doing now in our midst?
Yeah.
They did speak of themselves as a kind of a new covenant community, didn't they?
Yes.
Which is similar to what we find in the New Testament.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have a whole chapter in the book on the question of Christian origins and the Dead Sea Scrolls. How do we make sense of that? And there's a number of things that I touch on there. Some of them is like community structures, like you said. There's the way they understand themselves is perhaps some interesting parallels there. Both communities also refer to themselves as the way from, and interpret Isaiah 40 verse 3 in very, ironically, in very different ways.
Different ways, yeah,
but
that's right.
It's interesting to see that there's communities that are starting to organize themselves and understand themselves in some similar terms.
And reading some of the same texts.
Yes.
And reading those, say, these are valuable for us. Because they're guiding us, directing us into the future.
Yeah. That is a whole area that's exciting as well. One of my professors and really mentors in the scrolls was Dr. Peter Flint, who I know you have his books here. We're chatting about that.
We have his, as a special collection, we have Peter Flint's books here.
Yeah, it's definitely worth hanging out in that book section.
In fact, you said you packed those books. You were around, unfortunately, when he passed away.
Yeah, when he passed away almost 10 years ago now, which is hard to believe. We're good family friends, and I wanted to at least try to help, his legacy a bit, and part of that was getting, books to where they'd be read and enjoyed. But one of the things Peter would say, I remember this very vividly in his lectures, is if you look at the books of the Old Testament that are most cited in the New Testament, it's Psalms, Isaiah, and Deuteronomy.
Yeah, I remember hearing it.
Yeah, and when you look at Qumran, generally the ones that they're trying to figure out the most, like that Messianic apocalypse text, Psalms, Isaiah, and Deuteronomy. So what does that say? Like a lot of energy and effort and questions that folks are kicking around and trying to make sense of in this period. Yeah. And it's really exciting to see what have the scrolls really confirmed for us, what have they challenged for us, and then what can we change about how we think about Old Testament or New Testament in this world. And it's really all three of those things, which is a great opportunity.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing your lecture tonight.
Thank you.
And sharing you with our students.
Yeah.
Giving you an opportunity to encourage them into the study, not only just of the New Testament, but some of those writings around the New Testament that can help us, or Old Testament, that can shed light on these texts that we're reading. Because they are ancient, they are far removed from us, and we need just a little bit of help to read them as Gordon Fee used to say, read it for all it's worth.
Yeah. No, I'm very much looking forward to it and can't wait to connect with your students here and to see how the scrolls can be part of their bigger journey they're on. I think it's a really great thing to be part of, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks so much. Dr. Andrew Perrin, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Andrew Perrin was in Houston as part of a team of instructors to teach a course for us on the book of Daniel. That course will be available online in 2026 for people who might be interested in the Lanier Certificate in Theology and Ministry. In the meantime, you can watch now the panel discussion and John Walton's lecture on Daniel through our YouTube channel. Thanks to our audio engineer, Kathy Capes. Thanks to Phil Keggy for our intro and exit music. Thanks to Jessica Mauser and Jana Firestone. They are producers for the Church Leaders Podcast Network. Until next time, I'm David Capes. Thanks for listening.